The HOA fined me $1,000 because my grass was supposedly too tall, and they gave me 7 days to fix it or face another fine. What they did not know was that I had already photographed every yard on the street, including the HOA Karen who wrote the violation. Her own lawn was so overgrown that parts of it were nearly covering the sidewalk. I did not argue with her. I did not threaten her. I simply sent the photos to the board and asked one question. If the rules applied to everyone, why did they only seem to apply to me? The notice was sitting on my kitchen counter when I walked back into the house. I had read it several times because I honestly thought there had to be some mistake. The letter said my front lawn violated the community's landscaping standards because the grass had exceeded the allowed height. The violation fee was $1,000. It also said that if I failed to correct the problem within 7 days, additional daily penalties could be added. $1,000 for grass. That was the part that bothered me most. I was not living in a jungle. My lawn was not abandoned. The grass was slightly higher than usual because I had been dealing with a broken mower and waiting for a replacement part. I had already planned to cut it that weekend, but the HOA Karen who reported me did not care about that. She had apparently taken several photographs from across the street and submitted them to the board. The funny part was that she had done something else too. She had included the exact date and time of her complaint. That tiny detail would later become one of the most important pieces of evidence in the entire dispute. If you enjoy stories where entitled HOA Neighbors discover that rules work both ways, make sure you subscribe to HOA Revenge Files, because this one gets much bigger than a lawn violation. I called the management office and asked for clarification. The woman on the phone told me the violation had already been approved. I asked who approved it. She said the landscaping committee. I asked whether there was an inspection report. She said there were photographs. I asked whether the photographs showed the entire property. She said they showed the front lawn. That answer immediately caught my attention. I asked her whether the HOA had measured the grass. There was a pause. Then, she said they had not physically measured it. They had determined it was too tall based on the photographs. I looked at the violation again. It said the grass had exceeded the permitted height, but nobody had actually measured it. I thanked her and ended the call. Then I opened my security camera application. My cameras covered the front driveway and part of the sidewalk. I went back through the footage. There she was. The HOA, Karen, standing near the sidewalk with her phone pointed directly toward my lawn. She took several pictures. Then she walked back toward her house. I watched the footage again. She never stepped onto my property. That was fine. She did not need to. But the footage showed something else. Her own lawn. It was clearly visible behind her. And it was not exactly perfect. In fact, it looked significantly worse than mine. There were patches of tall grass near her driveway. The area around her mailbox was overgrown. The side edge, near the sidewalk, had weeds growing through it. And along one section of the front yard, the grass looked almost twice as tall as the lawn in the photos she had submitted against me. I smiled when I saw it, not because I wanted revenge, because I finally understood that the issue was not landscaping. The issue was selective enforcement. The next morning, I walked around my own property with a tape measure. I measured several sections of grass. I photographed them. Then I cut the entire lawn. I did not wait 7 days. I cut it that afternoon. I cleaned the edges. I trimmed around the driveway. I cleared the sidewalk. I took fresh photographs from multiple angles. Then, I put the $1,000 violation notice beside the photographs. At that point, I had a choice. I could pay the fine and move on, or I could challenge it. I chose the second option, but I was not going to make the mistake of turning it into an emotional argument. I wanted records. I wanted the actual rule. I wanted the enforcement policy. I wanted to know how the HOA determined the grass was too tall, and I wanted to know whether the same standard was being applied to every property. I sent a written request to the management company. I asked for the exact landscaping provision I had allegedly violated. I asked for the inspection documentation. I asked for the date of inspection. I asked for the measurement used to determine the violation. And I asked for the enforcement history of similar grass violations within the community. I expected a simple response. Instead, I received a short email saying that the board considered the matter closed. That response told me everything I needed to know. They did not answer a single question, so I sent another message. This time, I copied the board. The next morning, the HOA president contacted me. He said the board appreciated my concern, but suggested that I simply pay the fine and avoid creating unnecessary conflict. I replied that I was not looking for conflict. I was looking for consistency. If my grass violated a rule, I would correct it. But I wanted to understand how the rule had been applied. He said he would review the file. 2 hours later, I received another email. The board claimed the photographs were sufficient evidence. I asked one question. Where was the measurement? No answer. That silence was becoming very interesting. 3 days passed. Then, I received a second notice. It said the board had conducted another review and determined that my property required additional landscaping attention. The new notice added another $250 fee. Now I knew this was no longer about the grass. They were trying to pressure me into giving up. I responded calmly. I said I had already corrected the lawn. I attached the photographs. I attached the receipt for the mower repair. I attached the time-stamped security footage showing exactly when the original photographs had been taken. Then I added one more attachment. A photograph of the HOA Karen's lawn from the same day. I did not insult her. I did not call her names. I simply wrote that I had noticed several properties appeared to have similar landscaping conditions and asked whether the board would be conducting a community-wide review. That message changed the tone immediately. The HOA president called me instead of emailing. He asked where I had gotten the photograph. I told him it was visible from the public sidewalk. He asked why I had taken it. I said because the board had made landscaping enforcement the issue. There was another pause. Then, he said they did not want this turning into a neighborhood dispute. I told him I did not either. I just wanted equal enforcement. He promised the board would review the situation. I thought that might finally end it. It did not. The following week, the HOA Karen came to my door. She was furious. She said I had no right to photograph her house. I told her I had photographed the lawn from my own property and from a public area. She said I was trying to embarrass her. I told her that was not my intention. Then she said something that completely changed the situation. She told me that her lawn was different because she had an exemption. I asked what kind of exemption. She said it was a landscaping exemption approved by the board. I asked whether that exemption was written down. She said yes. That was the first time I realized we might have an even bigger problem. I asked whether the same exemption was available to other homeowners. She said it depended on the situation. Then she walked away. I went back inside and immediately emailed the HOA president. I asked whether the board had granted landscaping exemptions to certain properties. He replied that exemptions could exist under specific circumstances. I asked whether the rules required those exemptions to be disclosed or documented. He said the board handled them individually. That was not the answer I wanted. I requested a copy of the landscaping policy. This time, they sent it. I read every page, and there was no general exemption that matched what she had described. There were limited exceptions for specific landscaping conditions, but they required documentation and board approval. I checked the public records available to homeowners. There was no visible record showing that her property had been granted such an exemption. That did not prove she had lied. But it raised another question. Why had my property been fined immediately while hers appeared to have received special treatment? I decided to stop talking directly to her. From that point forward, everything went through the board. A week later, the board announced a special meeting. The official reason was landscaping compliance. The unofficial reason was obvious. Everyone knew what the meeting was about. I arrived early. Several homeowners were already there. The HOA Karen was sitting near the front. She looked confident. I brought a folder. Inside that folder were photographs. My original violation, the measurements, the after photos, the security footage, timestamps, the landscaping rule, the enforcement notices, and photographs of several other properties with similar condition. I had not planned to make a speech. I wanted the board to answer simple questions. When the meeting began, the president explained that the board took landscaping standards seriously. He said consistent enforcement was important. I almost smiled. Then the landscaping committee presented my case. They said my grass had exceeded the allowed height. I asked how they had determined the height. They said photographs. I asked whether anyone had measured it. They said no. I asked whether the rules required actual measurement. They said the board had discretion. I opened my folder. Then I asked why the violation notice specifically stated that the grass exceeded the permitted height when nobody had measured it. The room became quiet. The president said the language was standard. I asked whether the same standard was used for every homeowner. He said yes. That was when I placed the first photograph on the table. It showed my lawn on the day of the complaint. Then I placed another photograph beside it. The HOA Karen's lawn. The difference was obvious. Several homeowners started whispering. The HOA Karen immediately stood up. She said her property had an exemption. I asked the president whether that exemption existed in the official records. He looked through his folder. He could not find it. The Karen insisted that it had been approved. The president asked which board meeting had approved it. She gave a date. The secretary checked the meeting records. There was no vote, no approval, no exemption, nothing. The room became completely silent. Then the president asked her whether she had documentation. She said she would have to find it. That was the moment the $1,000 fine started looking very different. Because if there was no exemption, then the board had a serious consistency problem. The president asked me what I wanted. I said I wanted the fine removed. I wanted the additional fee removed. And I wanted the board to review landscaping enforcement across the entire neighborhood using the same written standard. I did not ask for her to be fined. I did not ask for revenge. I asked for the same rules to apply to everyone. The board agreed to suspend the fines while they investigated. But the HOA Karen was not finished. She claimed I had deliberately targeted her. She said I was trying to create trouble. Then another homeowner stood up. He said she had previously reported his grass too. He had paid a $500 fine. He said his lawn had looked better than hers. Another homeowner raised her hand. She said she had also received a landscaping warning after the Karen complained about her yard. The room suddenly changed. This was no longer one homeowner versus another. There was a pattern, and the board could not ignore it anymore. The president asked the management company to pull the enforcement records. They found multiple landscaping complaints connected to the same small group of homeowners. My name was only one of them. The HOA Karen's name appeared repeatedly as the reporting homeowner. But her own property had almost no enforcement history. That was the twist nobody expected. She had been one of the most active people reporting other lawns, while her own property had received almost no scrutiny. The board announced that it would conduct a community-wide landscaping inspection. The Karen looked furious. I stayed quiet because I knew the inspection would answer the question better than I ever could. And when the inspection results came back, they were shocking. Several properties had minor violations. A few needed trimming. Some needed weed removal. But her property was listed among the most serious cases. Her lawn had multiple areas requiring correction. The board sent her a notice. The same kind of notice she had sent to me. The same formal language. The same compliance deadline. And a fine. She received the exact rule she had used against me. The difference was that I had already fixed my lawn before the board meeting. She had not. The board gave her a deadline. She demanded an exemption. They asked for documentation. She could not produce it. She demanded that the board remove the fine. They refused. Then she accused the board of targeting her. The president reminded her that the inspection was community-wide. She said she had been singled out. The board showed her the inspection records. Dozens of homes had been reviewed. She was not the only homeowner who received a notice. She was simply one of the homeowners who had actually violated the rule. The irony was impossible to miss. The woman who had reported my grass because it was supposedly too tall was now standing in front of the same board, defending her own overgrown lawn. And this time, there was nowhere to hide. I eventually received a letter confirming that my $1,000 fine had been removed. The additional $250 fee was removed, too. The board apologized for the lack of documentation in the original enforcement process. They also changed the landscaping enforcement procedure. Future violations required clearer documentation. The board would use the same written standard for every property, and complaints could no longer be treated as automatic proof of a violation. That last change mattered, because a complaint was not the same thing as evidence. My lawn had never been the real problem. The real problem was that one person believed she could use the rules to control everyone else while expecting those same rules to stop at her own driveway. In the end, I never had to yell at her. I never threatened her. I never embarrassed her. I simply documented the facts and sent the photos to the board. The evidence did the rest, and that was the most satisfying part. The $1,000 fine disappeared. The extra fee disappeared. The enforcement policy changed. The board started checking everyone under the same standard, and the HOA Karen had to fix the very lawn she had been using as a weapon against everyone else. If you were in my position, would you have challenged the $1,000 fine or just paid it and moved on? Tell me in the comments, because I want to know how other homeowners would handle a situation like this. And if you know someone who has ever dealt with an HOA that seemed to enforce rules differently depending on who you were, share this story with them. Sometimes the best revenge is not destroying someone. Sometimes it is simply making sure the rules are finally applied equally. That $1,000 fine was supposed to make me back down. Instead, it forced the entire neighborhood to look at the rules more closely. And once everyone started looking, the HOA Karen discovered something she never expected. The same rules she had been using against everyone else applied to her, too.